In this section, we're going to go through the wireless page. Here on the Basic Wireless tab, we have Configuration View. We can either set this up manually or we can go through the Wi-Fi protected setup. For initial setup, this is not recommended, and the reason is if you can look down here, this is security disabled and your network SSID is Linksys. So we want to change these to something more secure. To change the SSID, we need to go to the manual setup. To change the security, we need to go to the wireless security tab. So let's go in here and change our SSID. Now here we have a few options. Network mode mixed. So what does it mean? What does mixed mean? So that means this wireless will communicate with B, G, and N devices. So any client that's running B, G, and N will work on it. Some people may not want that. Maybe they only want N on their router because they know they're not going to have anybody who's going to be using B or G clients. If you have a lot of friends coming over and they don't have, N cards in their devices, you might want to leave it at mixed. This is if you have old B and G only devices, no N. This is G only, B only, and only N clients. Or you can just disable the wireless network altogether here. So we're going to leave this on mixed because here we have multiple users and they have different cards. The SSID we're going to change. This is the network name that's broadcast out 10 times a second by the router. And if any client wants to join this network, they would select this network and they would put the security parameters and they could join it. Channel width, we have 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz, also called auto, or 20 megahertz. We're going to select auto because we do have some clients, and if we only have N clients, they can use the 40 megahertz. B and G clients, I can only use the 20 megahertz frequency. And the wider the frequency, the more bandwidth you have. Channel is auto. We're going to leave it on that. But if you had 20 megahertz only, you would have different options for your channels. And the channels you should really use here are channels 1, 6, and 11 because they are separated far enough that they don't overlap. The channels are only 5 megahertz apart, but the bandwidth you can see here are 20 megahertz. So channels 1, 2, and 4 overlap. So you want to jump to 6 and start using 6. So if you use 1, 6, and 11, they don't overlap and you should be fine. So we're going to leave this as auto. We're going to go back and change this 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz. And the SSID broadcast, have you ever gone to a place and you say search for wireless networks? The reason you find those networks is because they're being broadcasted out by the router. So you can disable this. It's a little bit more stealthy. And we're going to do that here. And we're going to save our settings. Now we're going to go to the wireless security tab and set our security. Currently security is disabled. We have a few options here. WEP. Now WEP's been cracked and it's not recommended. But if you have very old clients and they need to use WEP, and this is what you got. You want to use the highest encryption possible. You want to use 128-bit encryption. You have to enter a passphrase here. We're going to call it not very safe. And we'll say generate. And this will generate a key for the system. Now this key is static. It will not change over the lifetime of the session. So overall you want to use WEP. The keys are static. They don't get changed. And not very secure altogether. But if you have to use it, you have to use it. WPA Personal. WPA Personal is relatively safe. There have been some flaws with the TKIP encryption it uses. If you have old hardware and need to use WPA Personal, go ahead and use it. I need to enter a passphrase here. I'm going to call it more safe. The client has to have this same pre-shared key as it's entered here. and they'll negotiate on a key when the session comes up. And the new key is reissued every 3600 seconds. So this is pretty good. Even better is WPA2 Personal. So here it gives you an option of encryption, TKIP, or AES. So if your clients use TKIP or AES, this will work with both. So if the client supports AES, it will use AES. If the client uses TKIP, it will do this. So even if you have WPA clients, this will work with it. So this would be the recommended method for home users. Again, this is asking for a passphrase. We're going to call this more secure. And again, this key is renewed every 3600 seconds. The negotiated key. The next one, WPA Enterprise, is a little bit more complicated. And it's not usually used in a home environment. They require a Radius server, which is a server that authenticates the user before they get on the network. And this is the port used by the router to communicate to the server. So they communicate on port 1812, and you need to put a shared secret key here. This is the shared secret key between the access point and the Radius server. So let's put something in here. We'll just call it my key for now. And we'll go over this in more detail. And again, this key renewal is every 3600 seconds. Okay, let's take a closer look and see how this Radius stuff works. As you can see, we have a Radius server on the inside network. So the router uses this shared secret key to communicate with the Radius. So each wireless device on the network needs to authenticate with this shared secret key to the Radius server. If the access point doesn't have a shared secret key, then it can't talk to the Radius server. So when a client wants to join, the access point sends a prompt to the laptop saying, "What's your username and password?" The user inputs that information in. The router forwards that to the Radius server. The Radius server checks in its database, and if the user has put the right information in, then it will grant access. A session key is negotiated between the laptop and the access point, and it's changed every 3600 seconds, and it's pretty secure. Again, WPA Enterprise uses TKIP, so if you can use WPA2 Enterprise, it's better because you have a choice of TKIP or AES. So let's go back to our page. So let's take a look at WPA2 Enterprise. So WPA2 Enterprise uses TKIP or AES. That's the only major difference. It's more secure. You still put the Radius server IP in here. You still communicate on port 1812. And you still need to share secret key that's used between the access point and the Radius server. And the key is renewed every 3600 seconds. So again, if you're using a Radius server, this would be the recommended method. Our next option is Radius. Now Radius uses WEP, and it's not recommended, but if that's what you have to use, that's what you have to use. Again, you would put the Radius server IP address in here. You're using port 1812, and you put your shared secret key in, which is used between the Radius server and the access point. Then you put your passphrase in here. We'll just call it not secure, and we'll generate a key. Again, this key is used indefinitely, and each client must be configured with the same key. So this is not the recommended method of using it, but again, old hardware, that's what they require. We're going to go and set up ours with a WPA2 Personal. That's a recommended method for home. Okay, so we have WPA2 Personal. We have TKIP or AES again for our encryption. So depending on a client, let's put a passphrase in here. We'll call it time to be safe. And we need to put this on the client as well when we configure it. And the renewal key is every 3600 seconds. And we'll save our changes. Now if we go back to the basic wireless settings, you can see that your network has changed. Your security is WPA2 personal, and time to be safe is your passphrase for generating keys. Now we can go ahead and set up this Wi-Fi protected setup and it will be secure connect.